The autumn afternoon wrapped the northern suburbs of Washington, D.C. in a golden haze, leaves drifting lazily from the oaks lining my quiet street. I was Olivia Jennings, 36, a district prosecutor who'd spent the day dissecting evidence in a cramped office downtown. My shoulders ached from hours hunched over files, but the sight of my new home, a modest, two-story colonial I'd bought just over a month ago, brought a small smile. It was mine, earned through years of relentless work, a symbol of independence after too many compromises. I pulled into the driveway, my sedan's tires crunching on fallen leaves, and grabbed my takeout bag and briefcase from the passenger seat. Still in my tailored suit, heels clicking on the stone path, I approached the oak front door, keys in hand. Before I could slide the key into the lock, red and blue lights flashed from the street. Two police cruisers idled at the curb, their engines humming. Two officers stepped onto my walkway, their boots heavy on the stones. The taller one, broad-shouldered with a stern jaw, spoke first. "Ma'am, we received a 911 call about suspicious activity. Someone trying to break into this house." I froze, my key halfway to the door, the takeout bag swinging from my wrist. "This is my house," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I live here." The second officer, shorter and younger, eyed my briefcase and the food bag. "This property was owned by the Bradshaw family, white folks, for years. You got proof this is yours?" My pulse quickened, a familiar heat rising in my chest. At 36, I'd navigated prejudice in courtrooms and boardrooms, but this on my own doorstep felt like a violation. "I'm Olivia Jennings," I said, meeting his gaze. "District prosecutor. I just got home from work. This is my home." The taller officer, his badge read. Fletcher placed a hand near his belt, his expression unchanging. "We'll need to see some ID and paperwork for the house." I held his stare, my grip tightening on the keys. "You're questioning me because of my skin color," I said, my words measured. "I have every right to be here. I'm asking you to state a lawful reason for this stop." Fletcher's radio crackled as he spoke into it. "Need another unit. Subject, not cooperating." The second officer, Andrew, stepped closer, his tone cold. "Just show us the papers, ma'am. Make this easy." I stood my ground on the porch, the autumn wind whipping my coat. Neighbors' curtains twitched, faces peering out, but no one emerged. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with the sharp sting of injustice. I'd spent my career prosecuting violations of rights, yet here, on the threshold of my own home, I was the suspect. The keys dug into my palm, a reminder of what I'd fought for. This house, this life, this dignity. A third cruiser pulled up, its lights adding to the strobe across my lawn. A younger officer stepped out, his stride quick but less aggressive, his badge read, Price. He surveyed the scene on the porch, briefcase in hand, facing Fletcher and Andrew, and his brow furrowed. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice cutting through the tension. Fletcher gestured toward me. "Possible break-in. She's not cooperating." I turned to the new officer, my voice steady despite the anger simmering inside. "I'm Olivia Jennings. This is my house. I've shown them my keys, told them who I am. They're refusing to accept it." Officer Price Daniel, his badge seed, looked at me, then at his colleagues. His eyes held a flicker of something different, not dismissal. "Ma'am, may I see your ID and any proof of residency?" I hesitated, searching his face for the same skepticism, but found none. Slowly, I opened my briefcase, pulled out my wallet, and handed him my driver's license and the property deed I kept for emergencies. He reviewed them carefully, his expression softening as recognition dawned. "Prosecutor Jennings," he said, nodding. "I've seen you in interdepartmental briefings. Everything checks out." He handed the documents back, then turned to Fletcher and Andrew. "Situation's clear. No criminal activity. You can stand down." Fletcher's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. The three officers retreated to their cruisers, the lights fading as they drove away. The street fell silent, curtains closing one by one. I stood on my porch, keys still in hand, the takeout bag cold against my leg. The humiliation burned, not just from their questions, but from the ease with which my truth had been doubted. Daniel Price lingered a moment, his hands in his pockets. "I'm sorry for the trouble, Miss Jennings," he said, his voice genuine. "This shouldn't have happened." I met his eyes, surprised by the apology. "You don't need to apologize for them," I said. "But thank you for seeing me." He nodded, a faint smile breaking through. "Take care." As he walked to his cruiser, I finally unlocked the door, stepping into the warmth of my home. But the chill of the afternoon clung to me. This house was mine, paid for, fought for, yet in one moment my skin had made it foreign. I set down my bag, my hands shaking slightly, and looked out the window at the empty street. Daniel's face stayed with me, the only one who'd listened. I didn't know him, but in a day of erasure, his acknowledgement felt like a lifeline. As dusk settled, I wondered if this house would ever truly feel like home, or if my color would always cast a shadow over its threshold. 3 days after the incident on my porch, the memory still clung to me like the autumn chill. I'd gone through the motions at the district office, reviewing cases, arguing motions, my voice steady in court. But every time I passed a mirror or caught my reflection in a window, I saw the woman standing alone on her own doorstep, keys in hand, treated like an intruder. No report had been filed, no follow-up call from the department. The silence was deafening, a reminder that my truth, as a Black woman in this city, could be dismissed without consequence. At 36, I'd built a career on holding others accountable, yet accountability seemed to stop at my skin. That evening, as I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea, my laptop open to unfinished briefs, an email notification pinged. The sender was unfamiliar. Officer.D. Price at citypd.gov. Subject line read, "A proper apology." My heart skipped. Daniel Price's face flashing in my mind, the young officer who'd stepped in, who'd looked at me like a person, not a threat. I opened it. "Miss Jennings, I've thought about what happened on your porch every day since. I want to invite you for coffee, not to defend anyone, but to listen, if you're willing to talk. I owe you that much. Daniel Price." I read it twice, my thumb hovering over the reply button. Owe me? No one in uniform had ever admitted that before. Part of me wanted to delete it, to protect the walls I'd built after years of navigating a system that often saw me as other. But another part, the part tired of carrying the weight alone, wondered what it would feel like to be heard. I typed back, "Thursday afternoon, the Artisan Cafe on U Street, 4 p.m. Thursday came quicker than expected. The Artisan Cafe was a cozy spot in a vibrant neighborhood, filled with the aroma of fresh brews and the murmur of conversations. I arrived early, my coat draped over the chair, a black coffee in front of me. Daniel walked in at exactly 4, his off-duty clothes, a sweater and jeans making him look younger, less imposing. His dark hair was slightly tousled, his eyes scanning until they found me. He approached, a small smile breaking his serious expression. "Thanks for coming," he said, sitting across from me. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure either," I admitted, stirring my coffee. "But your email didn't sound like an excuse. That's rare, he nodded, ordering a tea when the server passed. I've replayed that afternoon 100 times. Fletcher and Andrew, they jumped to conclusions. I should have shut it down faster. You did more than they did, I said, my voice softer than I intended. You asked for proof instead of assuming the worst. He looked down at his cup, his fingers tracing the rim. I've been on the job 5 years. I've seen calls like that go wrong too many times. But seeing it happen to you, a prosecutor, someone fighting the same fights we're supposed to, made it real. I leaned back, studying him. It's real every day for people who look like me. In court, I'm respected. Outside, I'm suspicious. That day, on my own porch, it felt like everything I've worked for didn't matter. Daniel met my eyes, his gaze steady. It should matter. You shouldn't have to prove you belong in your own home. His words landed gently, but they stirred something deep, a crack in the armor I'd worn since the incident. We talked longer than I planned. I told him about the subtle doubts in the office, the times colleagues assumed I was support staff. He shared about a partner who'd left the force after speaking out against bias, how it haunted him. I joined to protect people, he said quietly. But some days, I wonder if I'm part of the problem. You're not, I said, surprising myself. Not that day. You listened. He smiled faintly, a warmth in his eyes that eased the knot in my chest. As we left the cafe, the autumn sun low in the sky, he walked me to my car. If you ever want to talk again, no agenda, I'm here. I nodded, my guard still up, but softer. I'll think about it. That night, alone in my house, I stood on the porch where it had happened, the leaves rustling underfoot. The humiliation hadn't vanished, but Daniel's words echoed. Someone had seen me, acknowledged the wrong. It wasn't justice, not yet, but it was a start. I didn't trust easily. Years in the prosecutor's office had taught me caution, but for the first time since that afternoon, I didn't feel entirely alone. Daniel Price, the officer who'd chosen to listen, had planted a seed of possibility. I didn't know where it would lead, but as I locked the door, the house felt a fraction less foreign, a fraction more like home. The weeks after our first coffee blurred into a rhythm I hadn't expected. Daniel Price didn't push, he simply appeared, like a quiet constant in my chaotic world. A text about a legal seminar, a shared article on reform, then an invitation to walk through Rock Creek Park when the leaves turned fiery red. At 36, I'd grown accustomed to solitude, my trust guarded by years of navigating a system that demanded I prove myself twice over. But Daniel, at 30, with his steady gaze and unassuming way, made space for me to breathe. We met often now, not by accident, but with purpose masked as coincidence. A courthouse hallway where he'd wait with 2 coffees, or a bench by the Potomac where we'd talk until the sun dipped low. He listened when I spoke of the invisible burdens, the times I was mistaken for staff in my own building, the weight of being the first or only in rooms that weren't built for me. It's exhausting, I admitted one afternoon, our steps crunching on gravel, always preparing for the moment someone decides I don't belong. Daniel nodded, his hands in his pockets. I can't pretend to know that exhaustion, he said, but I've seen it from the other side. Calls where assumptions are made before anyone asks questions. It's why I stay on the job, to change it, even if it's slow. His honesty disarmed me. He shared fragments of his life, a childhood in a quiet Maryland suburb, the pressure to join the force like his father. The moment he realized the badge didn't automatically make him right. I thought it was about protecting, he said, his voice low. But some days, it feels like protecting the wrong things. I looked at him, the wind tugging his coat. And now? Now, he said, meeting my eyes. I want to protect what's right. People like you, who fight harder than anyone. The words warmed me more than the autumn sun. Our conversations deepened, weaving between law and life. One evening, rain caught us outside a cafe, and he held his umbrella over me, our shoulders brushing. I can manage, I said, half smiling. I know, he replied, his voice soft. But sometimes, knowing someone's beside you makes the rain feel less heavy. I didn't pull away. The gap between us 6 years, my role as prosecutor, his as officer, felt smaller in those moments. We attended seminars together, where he'd ask thoughtful questions, supporting my views without overshadowing. At a panel on oversight, he spoke up about internal accountability, his words echoing my own arguments. Afterward, walking to my car, I said, "You didn't have to back me up like that." "I wanted to," he said. "It's not about owing you anymore. It's about believing the same things." His sincerity stirred something I'd buried. Michael's betrayal was distant now, replaced by this quiet connection. Daniel saw me not the title, not the color that sparked suspicion, but the woman carrying scars and strength. One night, over tea in a quiet bookstore cafe, he told me about a case that haunted him, a young man misidentified, his life upended by a rushed call. "I couldn't sleep for weeks," he said. "It made me question everything." I reached across the table, my hand near his. "That's why you're different," I said. "You question?" He smiled, his fingers brushing mine for a fleeting second, sending a warmth through me I hadn't felt in years. We didn't name it, this growing closeness, but it was there in shared glances, in the way he remembered my coffee order, in the ease of silence between us. When he suggested I join him for an internal briefing on community policing reforms, I agreed without hesitation. "It's a start," he said, his eyes hopeful, "toward something better." As we parted that night, the city lights reflecting on wet pavement, I felt a shift. Daniel wasn't just the officer who'd listened that day on my porch. He was becoming essential, a mirror reflecting a version of myself I'd almost forgotten, capable of trust, of hope. The world hadn't softened its edges, but with him, the path felt less solitary. I wasn't ready to define us, but I knew I wanted more of these moments, more of him. As I drove home, the porch light welcoming me, the house felt a little more like mine, because someone had chosen to see it and me as home. Monday afternoon brought an urgent summons to the district prosecutor's conference room, the air thick with the scent of coffee and tension. I set down my files, my heels echoing on the tile as I entered. The chief handed me a thick folder stamped in red. Complaint of abuse of authority. Officer K. Wilder. I flipped it open, my breath catching at the details. A 16-year-old black teenager stopped for a suspected stolen vehicle, subjected to excessive restraint. The evidence hinged on alley camera footage, silent but clear in its implications. And the sole internal witness, Daniel Price. My fingers tightened on the folder. At 36, I'd handled countless cases, but this one twisted something deep inside. Daniel, the man whose quiet presence had become my anchor, had put himself on the line. I spent the afternoon reviewing the footage, the boy's fear evident even without sound, Wilder's actions crossing every line. By evening, as the office emptied, I stood at my window, the city lights blurring. Daniel was waiting for me on the courthouse steps, his coat collar turned up against the chill, his face drawn. "You've seen the file," I said, stopping a few steps above him. It wasn't a question. He nodded, his hands in his pockets. "Wilder pulled me out of a bad call 2 years ago. I owed him, but after what happened on your porch, I couldn't stay quiet. Not again. I descended slowly, my heart heavy. And you know, I'm the one approving indictment. His eyes met mine, steady but pained. I do. Silence stretched between us, the autumn wind swirling leaves at our feet. You could recuse yourself, he said softly. Pass it to someone else. I shook my head, my voice firm. If I do that, I'm no better than the system I fight against. I'm the law, Daniel. I don't step aside because it's personal. He looked away, his jaw tight. Then you'll prosecute my testimony. Put me in the spotlight. My old partners will see me as a traitor. I'll be sidelined, maybe worse. Not worse, I said, stepping closer. You'll be doing what's right, and so will I. He turned back, his gaze searching. Even if it means we end up on opposite sides. The question hung, sharp and real. At 36, I'd learned to separate work from heart, but Daniel had blurred those lines. His support, his listening ear, the way he'd made me feel seen. These weren't just moments, they were a connection I'd come to rely on. Prosecuting this case meant exposing him, risking his career, his safety in a department slow to change. We're not on opposite sides, I said, my voice softer. We're on the same one, but yes, it'll cost us both. He descended a step, then stopped, looking up at me. I'll accept that cost, but if this pulls us apart, it won't, I said, though doubt gnawed at me. If we can look each other in the eye after, we'll know we chose right. Daniel nodded, his expression heavy. He walked away, his silhouette fading into the dusk, his shoulders carrying more than the night's chill. I stood on the steps, the wind cutting through my coat, my heart aching with a cold I couldn't name. I'd fought for justice my whole life, but this holding the scales, while the man who'd become my quiet strength stood as witness, felt like a fracture. His choice to speak up honored what we'd built, but it also threatened it. The world of law was unforgiving, and love, if that's what this was becoming, had no place in its rigid lines. That night, in my quiet house, I sat with the folder open, the teenager's face staring back from the report. Daniel's statement was there, clear and unflinching. I thought of my porch, the doubt in those officers' eyes, and how Daniel had been the one to see truth. Prosecuting this meant honoring that, but it also meant risking the fragile trust we'd woven. At 36, I'd learned to stand alone, but the thought of losing him, of our conversations ending, our walks ceasing, left me hollow. I closed the folder, the city dark outside my window. The scales were in my hands, but for the first time, justice felt like it might cost me something irreplaceable. As sleep evaded me, the wind howled, and I wondered if doing right would leave me standing alone again on my porch, keys in hand, heart heavier than before. The internal hearing for Officer Wilder lasted 4 grueling hours in a sealed room at headquarters. I sat as independent legal overseer, my notebook open, my expression neutral. Daniel testified from the stand, his voice clear and unflinching. He described the alley footage, the unnecessary restraint, the fear in the teenager's eyes. But he went further, speaking of patterns he'd witnessed, the quick assumptions, the dismissive tones after stops, the silence that protected the wrong people. His former colleagues sat stone-faced, their eyes avoiding his. No one clapped his shoulder as he stepped down, only averted gazes and heavy quiet. Outside the room, I waited in the monitoring area, listening to every word through the feed. Daniel didn't waver, even when questioned about loyalty. Wilder was suspended pending review, the department shaken. Daniel was reassigned to a desk unit for safety reasons, a quiet punishment wrapped in protocol. No one apologized to the boy, to Daniel, or to me. The system bent but didn't break. 2 weeks later, an unmarked envelope arrived at my office. Inside was a hand-drawn sketch, the front porch of my house that autumn afternoon. From behind Daniel's perspective, it showed me standing tall, keys in hand, facing Fletcher and Andrew. My posture was unyielding, my face resolute. Daniel's figure was in the background, hand loose, but eyes fixed on me, caught between hesitation and resolve. Beneath the drawing, in his neat handwriting, "You stood alone that day. I stood behind. Today, if you still need, I'll stand beside you." I traced the lines with my finger, my throat tight. At 36, I'd mastered standing alone, my career a fortress against doubt. But Daniel, at 30, had chosen vulnerability, risking his place in a world that demanded conformity to align with truth. He hadn't fixed the system, but he'd refused to look away, and that refusal had cost him. Spring arrived gently, the city's streets lined with budding trees. I continued my work, presiding over cases, but I'd added something new: weekly sessions at a Brooklyn community center, teaching law and racial equity. The room filled with eager faces, questions sharp and hopeful. In the front row, every Saturday, sat Daniel, his notebook open, his questions thoughtful. He didn't speak for attention. He listened, learned, and when he raised his hand, it was to build on what I'd said, not overshadow. One morning, as class ended, he helped stack chairs, his sweater sleeves rolled up. "You're changing minds in there," he said, his smile quiet. "We both are," I replied, my voice softer. At semester's end, another envelope came no sender. Inside was the same sketch, but updated. The porch in spring, flowers blooming, and Daniel's figure now beside mine, shoulder to shoulder. No note this time, just the image. That Saturday, as I stepped out of the center, Daniel waited by the steps, his coat open to the mild air. "Got room on the Justice ride today?" he asked, tilting his head with a grin. I smiled, unlocking my car. "Always one seat free." We drove toward downtown, the radio low, the city awakening around us. We didn't talk about the hearing, the reassignment, or the porch. Only this. "You didn't think I'd forgive," he said, glancing at me. "I didn't forgive," I replied. "I just chose not to let go of someone brave enough to face himself." He nodded, his hand resting on the console, close to mine, but not touching. The sun slanted through the windshield, warming the space between us. We didn't know what came next, partners in work, in life, or something undefined. But as the city unfolded ahead, two hands near each other, neither pulling away, I knew this. Justice isn't always a verdict. Sometimes it's the person who chooses to stay, to listen, to see you fully. Daniel had done that, not with promises, but with presence. And for now, in the quiet of a spring morning, that was enough to keep going together, one careful step at a time.